And we're recording. Welcome to RAINER Radio. I'm your host, Joshua Rainer. Been trying to get this thing going for a while now, and after trying to work with different recording and video things, I think we're actually up and running now. Hopefully this microphone is working properly. Probably have to work on sound for a bit to get everything sounding nicer and maybe soundproof the room a bit. But this is where we're starting now. So this podcast is going to be focused on really everything that I'm interested in. You know, that's going to be mainly health and everything that surrounds that. Vitality, lifestyle, culture, philosophy, religion, you know, any idea that contributes, to the health and vitality of a human being. So I figured I would start off with a little background. If any of you have been following me for a while now, or if you're a new follower and viewer, I've been on a health journey, I guess, as we all have. And most recently, I guess for the past few years, I went from a mostly traditional bodybuilding / fitness type diet with a lot of paleo influence. I started doing CrossFit in 2011 when I was in college, got introduced to paleo, thought to myself, this makes sense, but there wasn't really a lot of sense put into it, at least for myself. Paleo was pushing a lot of the low carb keto stuff, and I found myself being in college, going on, a 3 to 4 to 5 days a week training schedule with CrossFit and bodybuilding and weightlifting and everything that goes along with that. A lot of cardio, and doing essentially a zero carb paleo diet. I wouldn't even eat a carrot because of the carb content, but then I would also binge drink like 5 nights a week. And I was also doing intermittent fasting. So really the worst things anyone could ever do, and especially putting them together. So the amount of stress and cortisol and destruction I probably did to my body during that time was, a lot. After college, started transitioning a little bit more from CrossFit into more weightlifting, powerlifting, and eventually strongman focused. And so once I realized how important carbs were, I started eating a ton of them, and I gained about 50 pounds in, 7 months. And a lot of that was fat, but I got a lot stronger and my performance was getting a lot better. And then as I started, getting my calories and stuff in check, I leaned out a bunch and was in a really great state, I guess, relatively. Bloating was something I really always struggled with as long as I was a kid. I can remember not going to the bathroom for 3-4 days at a time and just always feeling constipated and bloated. And I can't say I know exactly why that was. I think a large part of it was drinking skim pasteurized milk as a kid in my cereal and stuff like that. So I was really congested on the bottom end and on the top end. I really couldn't breathe through my nose. And I think that really set the stage for a lot of problems throughout my life. If you think about physically being stuck in that way on each end, it's not a fun place to be. The amount of just overall anxiety and lack of ability to focus, right? I had ADD. Can't imagine why. I mean, not that any little boy wants to be crammed inside of a classroom for, 8 hours a day, but just a lot of little problems like that. I was generally healthy. I was always really athletic and did not have any serious illnesses. But if you think of it, this is just like a minor to potentially major just impedance to my life always. So when I was, in my 20s and doing this strongman CrossFit type training and eating, like I said, more of like a bodybuilder type diet in kind of a paleo vein, lots of, grass-fed meat and eggs and, a weird tumultuous kind of journey with dairy. I found raw milk in 2013, which was incredible because all of a sudden I wasn't having these, specific problems tied to dairy. But, if I was eating non-organic grass-fed raw milk, a lot of problems still. And so I really went my whole 20s on kind of this, like I said, a bodybuilding-ish, paleo-ish form to my diet. And it really stayed fairly stagnant for a while. And the first major change came in 2019. And I'm not exactly sure what caused it, but I started increasing my carb intake a ton. I was drinking, like a half-gallon orange juice during my workouts. And immediately after my workout, I was living in Venice Beach at the time. I would go walk to a acai bowl stand on the boardwalk, and they didn't even make what I would ask them to make. But they would make it for me anyways. They would take like whatever their large drink size cup was and make an acai bowl, and had chocolate and granola and honey in there. And during this time, I actually got leaner than I've ever been in my entire life. I'm 6 feet tall. At the time, I was about 195 pounds, and I was 10% body fat. And it really was just like incredible. And towards the end of 2019, I've been hearing a lot more of the carnivore diet started to get really popular. Sean Baker goes on Joe Rogan, the Jordan Peterson thing, Paul Saladino gets into the mix. And part of me thought that there was definitely something to that. My digestion honestly wasn't that bad at the time. And I wish I could go back to that point and kind of, maybe learn what I was learning now. But of course, I can only find my way the way I found it. And so, been watching a lot of this carnivore stuff, and I still always had this like weird paleo, ancestral, and even potentially like low carb bias in there. And I thought, if you could do this like perfect pure diet, then magic would happen. That's what I did when I was doing like the keto thing. It's like, man, if you just keto hard enough, you will just like turn into Superman and everything will be incredible. And like I said, I still didn't have like incredible digestion, but it was relatively pretty good for myself. But I've told this story before, and for you all now, I'll kind of explain how I really decided to make the decision going into carnivore. It was late 2019, and at the time there was this place called Counterburger where it's very like build your own thing. You can get up to like a pound size patty. They had beef and bison, and they had chicken burgers and whatever kind of like vegan, vegetarian nonsense. And then you can get it on various types of buns, on greens, and, fully customizable. And so towards the end of 2019, for whatever reason, I honestly can't remember, I started drifting more towards a lower carb thing. I think I had driven the carbs too far, to be honest. Not that I was getting fat from it, but I could just feel like this almost like, I don't know, I felt like I was revving my engine a little too hard. At the end there, I was eating like 500-600 grams of carbs a day on my training days, which, again, probably was just overkill. And so I would get like a pound bison burger on like a bed of greens. That was my go-to. And I ordered 2 of those, and I went out. I was going to go out with friends that night. And so I ate one of them, and the whole time I was out with my friends, I just felt this like weird, gassy, bloating thing. And so when I came home at the end of the night and to eat the second burger, I just decided I was going to eat just the patty and nothing else. And I didn't feel any bloating. And honestly, it was like that night I decided to start doing carnivore. And so I was, kind of finding my way into what that was, listening to every podcast, reading all these things, joining carnivore Facebook groups. And I had really good success with carnivore. I was, like I said, I was really lean at the time. I didn't really have a lot of weight to lose, but I got a little bit leaner, and my weight just got really, really stable. I think it got down to like just under 190. But the major difference was that I stopped tracking my calories. Now, I'd been tracking my calories since, the end of college pretty religiously for like 10 years. And I didn't find it to be that stressful a thing to do. I was eating a ton of food anyways because I was a, active, larger man who could eat a bunch of calories and still lose weight. But when I went into the carnivore thing, I just went into purely intuitive eating steaks and ground and, eggs and chicken and fish and just really whatever I wanted. And I felt really great for the first, month or two. And it really just became very clear very quickly that I needed carbs again. my training performance just like tanked. All my lifts went down a ton. And so I started adding in a bunch more raw milk again. I had kind of gone off it for a couple years, and a lot of honey. And so I was doing goat milk. I had goat milk available to me in the store. In California, raw milk's legal in stores. And the raw goat milk and honey, I drink like a quart bottle of it every day, pour a bunch of honey in there, throw a couple egg yolks in there, and things got way better. Pretty immediately, honestly. And, obviously because I introduced carbs again. So throughout 2020, I was kind of in a mostly strict carnivore, still probably only eating like 150 grams of carbs a day. But then, every once in a while I would, I don't really like to use the word cheat because that's just not the way that I approach that, but I would just eat other things from time to time. And then, I guess it was the end of summer, I started jujitsu. I had gone to one jujitsu class pre-COVID. Would have been like January 2020. And then COVID happened, gym shut down, whatever. And, it had been years and years since I was just like, get off your ass and go to jiu-jitsu. You want to, you're kind of intimidated by the fact that you're going to be doing a martial art. There's people on top of you. I had battled lots of injuries in my career and I didn't want to put myself in a situation where I would get hurt. And so I did that one class, gyms closed down. And, after they reopened back up, I had contacted them because I wanted to start back up. And if you know much about jiu-jitsu, there's a lot of different kinds of gyms, and some gyms are a lot more Brazilian. And those gyms seem to be a little bit more relaxed. And at least from my experience, no one responded to my email for forever, really. I've still never gotten a response years later. But a friend of mine, she was training at this other gym in town. And she had mentioned it that, hey, if you want to come to this gym, you're more than welcome to. And, just because I had gone to that other one before, I just kind of wanted to stick with that. And I had friends who trained there. But since I never heard back, I went to this other gym. I sent them an email and they responded, within an hour. And from that point on, I really started to just kind of do jiu-jitsu, 4 or 5 days a week. And I really fell in love with it. And so I was training now, some kind of like strongman type strength program, jiu-jitsu, and then a bodybuilding session. I would often do all those 3 in one day. And that's a ton of volume, a ton of stress. And you just can't do that without carbs. And so I started driving my carbs up more, eating fruit. Still didn't seem to be enough. And that's where I really felt like I had to reintroduce starch. If you've ever tried varying types of carbs and different types of training styles, especially with a high volume and a high intensity, I think you'll find that sugar doesn't work the same way starch does. And I don't know exactly what that is. Augenus von der Planitz, who was the primal diet guy, which is a raw, mostly animal-based type diet, even said for his bodybuilders, they would need to eat starch. And so I got, my performance was going up and up. I was building muscle and staying really lean. And at this point, again, like I was in a really good place. And of course I had to ruin it. And so, with COVID, the whole dynamic of conversations online really changed. You start getting into conspiratorial circles. And of course, like the diet world is so close to that. I always say the best red pill is diet. You look at the food pyramid and you go, well, that's bullshit. And so primal was this like peak conspiratorial, like cooked food is your destruction type thing. And I've been eating raw meat for, I don't know, almost 10 years at the time. I think back in 2013 when I started doing raw milk and I was ordering from this Amish farm, Amos Miller's, which you've probably heard about. I was also getting their organs and stuff, and I would eat raw liver and I would eat some of their meats raw. I just always really enjoyed it. And, I didn't have I had a little apprehension of it, but I always thought that, it probably wasn't a big deal if I just didn't eat that much of it. And so whenever I would go to restaurants, I would eat tartare. And of course, I've been eating sushi my whole life, oysters. So raw food itself, raw meat wasn't that rare of a thing. And so during that year of 2020, I was living in a place that wasn't really well temperature controlled. So in the, the winter, it'd be pretty cold. And then in the summer, it would be really hot. And I didn't really want to be cooking my food, like throwing steaks on a cast iron inside your house. It would just like, smoke, heat and everything, hot food. And especially during like all this volume of training. So I started eating a lot more raw meat. And then when I found the primal thing, I was like, okay, like this makes so much sense. Raw meat digests so easily for me. And, the carnivore thing was like, it was this huge jump in reduction in bloating. And even when I added in, honestly, like, the milk, the fruit, the starches, I still had a pretty good darn like state of digestion. And then I really started, after going like days, weeks at a time with no cooked food at all and just the raw meat, my digestion was just better and better. Like, it's people talk about like a flat tummy as this sort of idea of like whether or not you're fat. But for me, it was like, man, I'm 10% body fat. I'm shredded. I have a 6-pack. And if I don't flex and hold my stomach in, I look pregnant. So, I could eat 4 pounds of raw meat for dinner and not feel bloated and wake up the next morning with like, I don't know how else to describe it, but it's such a rare feeling for me. And maybe this is what normal people feel like who have functioning digestion, but it didn't even feel like my stomach was flat. It felt like my stomach was being like pulled inward, like a negative bloat, so to speak. And it was this amazing feeling and like clarity, like both of digestion and of mind. And so I started on that primal path and I felt so good. There was this weird state of bliss, and I have certain opinions on that, which I'll get to later, but it felt like this very religious, really like purity experience. And like I said, I'd been seeking for this like purity of diet thing, and that purity of body created the sense of purity of mind. And, when I first started going into the primal thing, I was still eating like kind of closer to my normal diet and just eating my meats raw. I was still eating, I was eating some starches and I was still eating salt. And, on the primal diet, you're not allowed to eat salt. And so instead they have these celery juices because celery is really high in sodium. At least that's my sort of perception on it now. And once I kind of started going further down that path, very strict in the primal sense, read all of his books front to back, listening to he has hours and hours of workshops and talks and seminars on YouTube. And I would go on walks and just listen to all of them, like for, and sometimes multiple times. And one of the things that he talks about would be like, getting fat on purpose to protect yourself, filling your body with raw and, mostly saturated fat to protect yourself from the toxicity of the world, whether it be cooked food, whether it be radiation, whether it be, all these kind of artificial ingredients, the water, the air, whatever it is. And I remember because at the time I was still living in Venice and Los Angeles, and I had been visiting my friends in Salt Lake City, and it was kind of getting to the point where I was like, okay, I want to move here. And so in February of 2021, I came out for a couple of weeks to look for a place to live, checked out a couple houses and apartments and stuff. And when I was there for, I think it was 2 weeks, when I showed up, I remember because I did a training session with them like the first morning after I got in. And at the time I was still like very, very lean, shredded, like veins everywhere. And I remember our training session and just like being like, wow, like I'm super, super vascular. And by the time I left, all of my definition was gone. In that 2 weeks, I don't know how much weight I gained, but, I'm talking about eating like whole sticks of butter, drinking so much milk, gallons and gallons of milk, And like I said before, I had been drinking mostly goat milk. And I don't know exactly why. I just felt like it digested better. And part of me thinks that it helps you stay lean better too. But, in my head, I'm like, okay, no, I'm doing this on purpose. Like I'm doing this for my health. Like it's okay to get kind of fat. And really not that long after, I ended up moving there only a couple weeks later at the beginning of March, my energy levels really started to drop. Like my ability to, first off, my desire to go to the gym really, really went away. I was just really content laying around and talking, which, I always loved hanging out with friends and talking, but it wasn't, yes, my energy was lower, but it's like my desire was lower. I didn't have that desire to go to the gym and push myself. I would go in a couple times a week and do a couple sets of a couple things. And, you know, it stopped being a priority. And in my head, I thought like, no, this is a good thing. Like I'm getting healthy. I'm evolving past this like incessant need to just work out like a madman, which I really had been doing my entire life. You know, I started working out when I was like 11, 12 years old. And so from that point on, my health really just started to get like worse, but not really quite evidently to myself, because again, I felt so good. At least I convinced myself I felt so good. And so, you know, later that year in 2021, I met my now fiance, and she lived here in Colorado. And so I came out and spent, you know, like a month with her here. And we were both doing primal at the time. It's kind of how we met. And so, you know, all raw meat, lots of organs, making juices and lots of milk, and making raw ice cream, which is incredibly delicious. And over time, I started to like really just kind of feel sick. You know, I mean, I would just get nauseous. I was nauseous all the time. You know, there'd be times when I would try to eat and I would really be having to do everything I could to like not throw up. You know, like I'd be hungry and I would put like one piece of meat in my mouth and I just want to throw it back up. And so it really felt like the only thing I could easily digest would be like milk and fruit. But then the more I would do that, the worse my digestion would get. And then later that year, at the end of, would have been the end of September, I got really, really sick and I ended up getting meningitis. It was a very weird, you know, kind of falling into that, because it kind of crept on a little bit. And I don't really know exactly what happened or what caused it. I had gone down, we went to go stay with some friends in southern Colorado, and our friends live on this really beautiful property, and they have this kind of like big marsh land on their property. And we were sitting around there like by like the fire, and I got hundreds of mosquito bites, just like riddled. I mean, way beyond the point of even being able to count them. And I've always been, you know, really, I don't know. Mosquitoes have always been really attracted to me. That's just for whatever reason. I don't know what causes it. Sweet blood, whatever it is. Didn't think much of that. And then over like the next week, I was volunteering on this, this vegetable and fruit farm. And as my mosquito bites faded away, I started to get these other dots. You know, it didn't look like the mosquito bites faded into these dots. It looked like this new thing. And some people kind of mentioned it to me. You know, I kind of felt this like weird kind of state of stress. And a friend mentioned that it kind of looked like chicken pox. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. I'm 30-something years old, whatever. And as that week went on, I started to just feel a little colder, a little weaker, a little more tired. And one night I was leaving the farm. I remember I was coming home and I just like really wasn't feeling well. Like, came home. My fiance made me some chicken soup, and it really, really intense fever started to settle in, but I didn't feel like this normal sickness. The next day or two, I had incredible chills at very varying times, but I started to feel a lot more like detached, like mentally detached, not all there. Kind of felt like I was drunk in a sense, but I wasn't aware. I was aware enough to know they didn't feel right, but I wasn't aware enough to understand what was going on. And I started like tripping over myself, and I didn't feel dizzy. My balance was terrible. And I remember I drove to the store to get some water, which in retrospect was a terrible idea. And I was like having a hard time like not hitting the curb. And I just started to get worse and worse and worse until, I just like full-blown, whatever you want to call, flu-type symptoms, vomiting all over the place, like, shitting myself. Like, really, I just became a complete mess. And mentally, though, I was so, like, I've been sick before, and I'm like, man, this sucks, I'm sick. But this was something completely different. And it got so bad, my fiance had to call my mom to come out to Colorado because it was just, she didn't know what to do. We ended up going to see like a naturopath, and she did some varying tests on me and said that I had viral meningitis, but that it had kind of like passed. I was sort of over it. There's really nothing to do at that point, but just to recover. In my test, it said I had hyponatremia, so I was extremely sodium and electrolyte depleted. And of course, like I'd been eating this diet without salt for months and months and months, almost a year. And then I was vomiting and diarrhea and all these things, expelling whatever little fluids I had left. So, I had to go back home to LA and stay with my parents. And I was really, bedridden for a couple weeks. And it took a long time for me to really be able to do much. I would try to go outside and go for a walk. And after like 5 minutes, I would just be so exhausted. And so, of course, like this started like a big shift in diet to kind of, I don't know, come back to normalcy or something like that. And so my main source of food during that time was, some type of bone broth with a gelatinous meat, like some kind of shank or something, bone marrow in there, lots of salt, lots of warmth, and then like a big bowl of white rice with tons of butter and tons of salt. And I pretty much just ate that for, I don't know, a couple weeks. My mom was making for me every single day until eventually I kind of like got back to normal-ish. And so then it sort of became this point where I'm like, I don't know what to eat. It's when you go on such a strange diet that's like this very like strict religious adherence, it's hard to break off of that because I wrapped up so much of, honestly, like my identity into that. And so I was trying to figure out like really what I should eat, because I don't even know what I think is good for me anymore. I can tell that I need certain things. I like that rice with butter and salt was just like life. It was godsend. I knew I had to eat that. And of course I knew that I wanted meat and things like that, and, drinking some milk here and there. And, at that point I was just really looking for anything to kind of help me feel good, because I had fallen so far from anything that even resembled feeling good. And, during the last couple years, around the time that I was finding the primal stuff, I was hearing more about Ray Peat. And I had first heard of him in maybe 2012, 2013, because I was in this paleo Facebook group, and occasionally someone would mention him and just call him insane or a quack or something. But he really started to become a lot more popular in social media. You see all kinds of people talking about him. And honestly, even if they don't talk about him, they're talking about his things, right? Like you're seeing big carnivore advocates say, oh, orange juice is a crazy superfood. You're seeing people promote adrenal cocktails and things like this and start talking about serotonin. Maybe it's not this great happy hormone. And so his stuff started to make more sense to me. And not only that, but it's still centered around like a normal diet, and it's not like, and that's the thing too, is that anyone in this sphere will tell you there is no Ray Peat diet. And so I'm not following a Ray Peat diet now. I'm reading a lot of his stuff and doing a lot of things that come from principles that he espouses, and listening to people who, kind of believe in what he's saying as far as maybe sugar is not the enemy. Maybe your body actually really needs it. Maybe serotonin's not so good for you. Maybe estrogen is not the woman hormone. It's a stress hormone. And so I've started to kind of get more into this, first off, just normal state. I eat normal food while keeping these certain principles in mind. And so kind of where I'm going forward as far as health is I just want to feel as good as possible. I want, that really strong sense of vitality that I have felt at certain times in my life. But it's still, for me at least, centered around this, like fixing my digestion. That's the thing is my digestion, I told you back in 2019, my digestion actually felt relatively darn good. I was very lean and my stomach was relatively flat. And then I did carnivore and, it worked until it didn't. And then I added these other foods in and it kind of started to get better. And then I went primal and then it got way better until it started to get way worse. That feeling I talked about where it was like that negative bloat from primal, that stopped happening after a couple months. And this general sense of bloat and intestinal this stress really just became my norm. And even now, I still find it hard to really experience really many moments without some kind of bloat. It happens on certain days, and I can't really pinpoint why. I know that carrot salads really help. I know that coffee really helps by moving things through my gut. Gut motility is an important thing. And so right now I'm just in this like experimentation phase. And what's been really interesting is as I have been feeling a lot better as I've been diving more and more into this stuff. And even, what's weird is it's like I feel better in all the other ways. I don't feel, it's like this kind of emotional, mental, spiritual sense that's of feeling better that's a lot stronger. Whereas it used to be purely physical was my focus, and now like this physical stuff is, of course it's all connected. And the physical stuff, especially like my gut, is kind of on its way. But what really motivates me is this just overall sense that I feel better, even if I can't really describe what that means. So that's a little backstory. I'm hoping to have mostly guests on this podcast, but if I have ideas and things that come to me, I'll certainly do some solo videos. And, if you guys ever have questions or things that you would like me to cover, topics you'd like me to cover, you can always leave comments on any, whether it be YouTube or social media or anything. And maybe I'll do some kind of Q&A type thing. And so what you can really expect is just this exploration. I will interview people that I find really interesting, a lot of close friends of mine, a lot of people who I admire, who I've, come across online. And, whether it's a health type thing, and that's the thing is like, what is health? Health isn't just about, the food you eat or the workout you do. The health is this all-encompassing thing. And that's why for me, it really is vitality, is what creates this incredible version of humanity. What makes these really special people who are driven, who are focused, who are happy, who have all these different aspects of their life. And, sometimes that may look like someone who's really hyper-focused in one thing, but to be able to excel in one specific thing, even at the cost of the other, like that requires a certain type of person. That requires a certain mindset, requires a certain spirit. And so, I have a couple people who I have in mind, but if you have any guests who you think I either would benefit from talking to myself or that you would like to listen to, please let me know. And so, like I said, this is the first time I've really used this setup. And so if you have any recommendations on sound or video or lighting, tell me how this all comes out quality-wise so I can hopefully give you all a better product in the end, a better form of content. So that's probably going to wrap it up for this first video for myself. Thank you all for watching and listening. Like I said, like leave any kind of comment below that you'd like. This being the first episode, there's probably a lot of things that I'll work on and try to improve. Thanks everybody so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time.